All right. Okay, otherwise let me know. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for setting this up. The world is very different compared to when we had the first Nordic convention a year and a half ago in Lund, Sweden, that is for sure. Traveling has become quite restricted, and unfortunately we cannot meet in person. Definitely a big shame. But the world is changing, and if we stop thinking about what is outside our own country until the corona pandemic is history, the price will for sure be even higher. And on a positive note, I'm joining today from Kiev, Ukraine, where I'm currently an intern at the Danish embassy. So I, for example, couldn't have participated under normal circumstances. And I do also think that we have other people joining from Eastern Europe and perhaps Russia. Well, we only have an hour, so let's get to it. The topic of this session is Arctic security. And for the next hour, we will debate questions such as, are the Nordics chess pieces in a new Cold War? Have we realized the seriousness of the situation? And what is the Nordics' role to play? A very quick brush up on the Arctic. It is the huge region north of the polar circle where only 8 countries have territory, being the US, Canada, the 5 Nordic countries, and Russia, which alone covers approximately half of the coastal line within the Arctic Circle. And then there is China claiming to be a near Arctic state. I believe we will get back to that at some point. 2 important institutions to know of are respectively the Arctic Council, a forum for the 8 Arctic nations, and then there is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, which is the legal framework on how to divide sea territory, hence also the Arctic Sea. Oil, trade routes, climate change, power politics are all matters intertwined into the Arctic matter. But luckily we have 5 excellent speakers to help us solve the matter of Arctic security, so I look very much forward to hear what you have to say. My own personal interest accelerated last year when I participated in a Russian organized Arctic media conference in Murmansk, northern Russia. I am, however, not nearly as qualified on the topic as our speakers, so to the audience, please share the questions you find missing in the chat. The format of the debate is that first each speaker will answer the question, what do you see as the 2 most imminent threats to a peaceful development in the Arctic region? Then we'll have a moderated debate, and finally some questions from the audience. Rasmus, would you maybe mind starting presenting yourself briefly and introduce your perspectives on the matter and then pinpoint what you see as the biggest threats to the Thank you.
Yes, and many thanks to the organ. So very quickly, Bertelsen, I'm a professor in Tromsø, but I'm a Danish national. Grew up in the 1980s in Reykjavik. So I remember very much, how to say, the Arctic of the Cold War. I remember very much the high level of American activity at Naval Air Station Keflavik, the Keflavik Airport. And I also remember the Reagan-Gorbachev meeting in Reykjavik in '86. So in many ways, the Arctic is, how to say, coming back to the Arctic of my childhood. And that's, of course, because we are coming back to a bipolar or multipolar world, bipolar American-Chinese, multipolar with the return of Russia. The post-Cold War Arctic, it was not the end of history. It was not a natural state. It was an exceptional situation because of American hegemony. The 2 areas of Arctic security that I find particularly interesting, it's first of all, it's strategic stability or nuclear mutual deterrence, because the Arctic is very important to nuclear weapons. And Russia, much weaker today than the Soviet Union, Russia is very dependent on its nuclear deterrent, which is centered on the Kola Peninsula and the Sea of Okhotsk in the Far East. That nuclear deterrent is undermined by American missile defense and very aggressive American air and naval operations close to the Barents Sea, close to the Kola Peninsula, and close to the Sea of Okhotsk in the Far East. The other area of Arctic security that I find particularly interesting, it's space security. Space security will be the next big area of international security. And there is a lot of space science, technology, and infrastructure in the Arctic, which plays a very important role in space security. But that's a long and complicated story. But we're talking very much about American infrastructure in Alaska, Greenland, Thule, and the Vardø radar in northern Norway. Of course, Russia has a lot of nuclear and space infrastructure in the Arctic, and China is seeking access. So thank you very much. I hope I didn't go too much over time.
Thank you, Rasmus. That was just perfect. I think we'll head on to having the presentation by Lassie.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you for inviting me to this important conference. Indeed, unfortunately, we cannot see each other in a person. In my short presentation, I mean, before I will give my two points of view, I have two prerequisites to take account when you are listening. And on the one hand, that I'm taking literally that basic knowledge about the current state of Arctic geopolitics and security as a result of a significant transformation from the military-based security of the Cold War into comprehensive security of the post-Cold War. And that it has resulted mutually beneficial high geopolitical stability and cooperation. On the other hand, I'm very carefully using words like threat picture, enemy picture, as they easily include a consequent spiral of danger, threat picture, escalation, enemy picture, warfare, war. So instead, I prefer words like a challenge or problem, big problem. So which are challenges, but they are challenges because we try to find a solution. And it is doable. And we can, so that we can fix them. Okay, so let's go to my two challenges. The first, rapidly advanced climate change. I mean, in the Arctic, in particular warming of the Arctic region, which became became like a shock, very well known after the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment 2004. But actually, like we know now, that it was known scientifically and secretly already after the Second World War. For example, Swedish scientist Hans Alman was invited to give a lecture at Climate Change in Polar Regions at Joint Research and Development Board at Pentagon. So it has been known for decades. But actually, now we are not only dealing with this rapidly advanced climate change, but it's combined with pollution, loss of biodiversity. So they together are forming a real big problem. As if this wouldn't be enough, whenever a balance is sought between environmental protection and climate change mitigation vis-a-vis an increase of new economic activities for Arctic development, there is ambivalence. And this is coming from our recent scientific study, policies and strategies. And that ambivalence is largely due to political inability, when Arctic states are hesitating to implement climate change mitigation, that means to make the hard decisions. And when they are neither ready to take into account study and further developed learned lessons about the value of mutually beneficial common interest of Arctic geopolitics, Arctic governance. So that is my first challenge. My second challenge is that faith to believe and emphasize the national, unilateral, competitive military, which includes the nuclear weapon systems, which Rasmus mentioned. So that concept is very much still maintained by the military-industrial complex and security political elites. And it's also supportive, it is supported by like-minded policymakers, mainstream experts. And to me, this causes much doubts about the achieved status of stability and confidence, and that the Arctic states have already reshaped their geopolitical reality. So the point is that why to cause misinformation there when actually we have achieved something which we should maintain and further developed. So all in all, political inability to make hard decisions together with stagnation of being open-minded for new security premises and paradigm shifts is a real challenge here. So maybe we should have an example of the Black Lives Matter movement, that we could have geopolitical imagination enhanced by empowerment and multiple voices of security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lassi. And then I think we'll head on to the Czech Republic, where we have Barbara. Barbara, are you ready to your presentation? Thank you.
Thank you, Jonas, and thank you for inviting me. Very briefly, as it was mentioned, I'm based in Czech Republic at Masaryk University. I would also like to mention that newly I'm a principal investigator of the new 3-year interdisciplinary project at Masaryk University, and also head of the Arctos and the Arctic Center for Human to Environment, Climate Change and Human Activities in the Arctic. And I will just nicely follow up on what Lassi just mentioned, because we worked together for nearly 2 years at IASA, the International Institute for Applied System Analysis in Austria, on really comprehensive and broad research focusing on Arctic states and non-Arctic states, policies and strategies in the Arctic. And we also analyze their Arctic Council documents, chairmanship programs, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot actually that we can take as a start for our discussion. Not to overlap, but with I would probably highlight one thing that I consider really relevant when it comes to Arctic security or the Arctic and international relations, and that is the threat or potential of the threat to spill over of other conflicts to the Arctic. Even though we have the tendency to repeatedly say that the Arctic is exceptional, no conflicts from the outside matters, any affairs inside the Arctic, and among the states in the Arctic. However, we have seen some of those disruptions in connections among those Arctic states. So I believe that this could be seen as a potential threat for the Arctic, that other conflicts outside the region might spill over to the Arctic. And as an international community, I believe that with any analysis and report reports such as the one that we have published, and all my colleagues on this panel are distinguished experts on the Arctic. So all of these academic contributions can help to mitigate any spillover to the Arctic, as we see the cooperation in science or in research can really speed up the peaceful processes, or even keep them and help to maintain the Arctic as some peaceful region. So I believe this is crucial and key here. Thank you.
Thank you for your brief presentation, and then we will head out to Christer. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very glad to be here. I'm professor at the Arctic University of Norway at the Department of Technology and Safety. But my background is in international relations, so I think that I will take that former hat on me today, because you're international relations students, most of you. I would like to contribute with a couple of theoretical notions. So I think that it's all about the old good, bad security dilemma that we have here, where the have to have a bad motivation when one security, so the other party will take it as a challenge for its own security, and that in a way creates that spiral that was mentioned earlier. Now the point here is that if you are an international relations scholar, so from whichever point of view you are looking at this, so it doesn't go well. The realists think that this really is a dilemma, and dilemma is worse than a problem because you cannot solve it. It's a dilemma. That's the definition of dilemma. And but you can manage it. You can manage it with power politics, with balancing, and you can manage it with statesmanship and diplomacy. And if you are good, you can deal with that dilemma. Then we could take institutionalists who say that yes, it cannot be solved, it cannot be resolved, but it can be mitigated, this dilemma, and it can be mitigated exactly with the existence of institutions which somehow work as a school for cooperation, where tit for that diplomacy will work, because you learn to trust each other and so on, and it's this nice wording about Axelrod about the shadow of future playing its role here. And then finally, for example, you have the constructivist and all kind of several post approaches which say that that you actually could resolve it, basically in the spirit of Lassie, I suppose. You can resolve it if you manage to create a common security culture, common security identity, which presupposes shared values and ideas. Now, why it looks bad is that we have this security dilemma in a very realist world, and then we have these institutions which are so weak that they do not work. Arctic Council is not a key to this, and then we don't have any common values. So from whichever perspective you look at it, it goes bad. Then I would like to add that these are then changing a little bit nowadays, because we have also these hybrid threats. That is my second point. So so they are kind of old or new ways to participate in this old gamble, and we have seen for example, migration is used for this, or there are perhaps some kind of cyber threats and something like that. And now the combination of these two are this old security military threats is, and this new hybrid threats is that I think Raymond Aron said it once that that the moment of truth nowadays is not the war, is a crisis, because war can happen by accident. Yeah, I would say because of the great risk of nuclear power, nuclear weapons. So when we have now these hybrid threats added to this old toolbox, so there can be crises, different type of crises, which do not necessarily resemble the old type of war making, but warfare, but anyway create something that is not easily to be called peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we'll head on to Andreas, who's the last. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonas. So hello from a sunny Oslo, where it's still summer, which is great, I guess. And yeah, so you asked us to briefly introduce ourselves, and I'll just start with, I guess, saying that I'm from the Norwegian Arctic. Have to put that statement out. I don't have the pleasure of living up in the Arctic as Christer and Rasmus is at the moment. I've looked at the Arctic for a decade or so, studying in London, working in Brussels, and then in Canada as well. And then now I'm back in Norway, although in Oslo, unfortunately. And my focus is, I guess, as also you mentioned, Jonas and Joni as well, the same as the other speakers here, security related. And I'm not going to repeat, talking about imminent threats. I'm not going to repeat what the others have said. I think I very much agree with them. I like Lasse's point about challenges, perhaps, instead of threats. Might be a bit more constructive way to speak about it. But by all means, what Barbara mentioned, the first point concerning the negative on Arctic relations, I definitely see as a threat or a challenge. And we've seen this increasingly disruptive tendencies in Arctic dynamics. I'm not sure I believe in the Arctic exceptional region. I don't think it is exceptional in any way per se. I think the only thing that makes it exceptional is that the Arctic states have chosen to keep it a bit separate, even with events, for example, in 2014 and afterwards with Crimea. Arctic states still chose to keep regional cooperation rather separate from what happened elsewhere. But I think we're seeing cracks in that Arctic fabric at the moment, especially with the US and the Trump administration, and statements that we've seen there, not so much concerning the Arctic, but concerning China in the Arctic, which is something we could debate, but I very much see it as something that is not related to the Arctic at all, but it gets an Arctic component. So suddenly Arctic relations become a bit more tense because of events elsewhere, in this case, the US-China competition more globally. But you also see it closer to home, where I'm sitting, or where Christer and Rasmus is sitting as well, with NATO-Russia relations, where we see an increased tension. Again, not so much due to the Arctic issues per se, but due to also what Rasmus mentioned, the strategic arsenal of Russia being located in the Arctic and located close to a NATO country, Norway, that has to deal with a lot of this. So that's, I guess, the first challenge really that is prevalent in the Arctic right now. And then an additional point that none of the other presenters mentioned concerns actual resource conflict in the Arctic. So there's been a lot of headlines over the last decade over oil and gas and shipping in the Arctic and how this might all lead to geopolitics. And I think most studies, including from those on this panel, have shown that it's not that simple. But I still see certain resources in the Arctic. And then I'm particularly thinking of marine living resources in the Arctic causing a challenge. Perhaps not a threat to the Arctic, but at least a challenge to the Arctic states. Because, I mean, the oceans are warm, even more so than other parts of the world. And we're seeing that states that are supposedly good at cooperating together, like Iceland and Norway with the EU and the Faroe Islands, aren't even able to agree on, for example, the distribution of mackerel, We're seeing a snow crab dispute between Norway and the EU. And we're seeing also some tension concerning the cod stock in the North Atlantic or Barents Sea. And all these small little incidents, although in my agenda, they still relate to other issues as well when it concerns, in some cases, just distribution of resources, allocation of quotas, but other times it relates to issues like Svalbard, for example, which is a debate we could have on its own. So it's just a small example of the fact that there are certain challenges in the Arctic as well, not only related to elsewhere. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all of you. So now we had 5 really good presentations where we covered different aspects of the Arctic security matter. And it relates to nuclear deterrence, it relates to climate change, spillover from other conflicts. A lot of things goes into this discussion. The thing is that we have limited time. We have approximately half an hour left, and we have 5 excellent speakers. So to try to make the most of it, I will shift the discussion now from being about just the threats to trying to make it a bit more constructive. So maybe discuss what should be different in the future. Do we need to establish a new institution to deal with threats in the Arctic? Should it be integrated into the Arctic Council? Should we, as Barbara touched upon, ignore other conflicts, or is there a spillover from other conflicts? So for the speakers, I'd like to ask them to try and think about constructive solutions, and even though there's much to discuss on the exact threats from China, Russia, US, etc., try and make it a bit more focused on what should be the future now, and also to try and make it a bit alive, the discussion, and not just presentations. I will jump a bit random around with your speakers and give you the floor, but please send a message in the chat or make a reaction, and then I will know you'd like to comment on exactly what we're talking about right now. First, I would like to go back to Krista and hear you a bit about the thing you talked about, creating a common security culture. Does this mean that we are having a new institution? Is this something we can establish within the Arctic Council, or what are you seeing? Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think that that way goes over the head of the Arctic in a way. So those decisions are about recreating this these arms control treaties and similar type of security organizations that we have already or have had already, and recreating that, and that then means that the Arctic destiny is dependent on this bigger picture, and the bigger picture between US and Russia is of course dependent on the bigger picture between US and China, because China has to be involved in these arms control issues if US would come again, because now it's withdrawing. But when it comes to these positive issues, so I think that there are two positive avenues in a way, or actors or group of actors which could work more positively, but unfortunately even those two actor groups are in a way against each other. So the first one is big business. So if the big business from different countries find each other, the capitalists, as you might want to say, if they find each other to exploiting the natural resources of the Arctic, so they create immediately kind of a contact between the countries, also even if they are multinationals. But now we have these sanctions, so no Americans are helping Russians, and no Russians are helping Americans, and so on. The other actor group would be then NGOs. They have a natural most NGOs in those fields like human rights or environmental issues. So they have natural interest. They may have already this kind of joint, common, shared identity in a way. So they can work together. But that is again against the business interest. And here we are, so it's a very complex picture, and then we have this state level here. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I will just give everyone the chance to mark if they want to comment on this topic. Are there any of the speakers who would like to advocate for? Yes, who are we having here?
I'm Lassi.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that has been discussed for so long. The Arctic Council has been there, meaning more than for 20 years, that should security, military security, be included. I think it has been good so far not to, to exclude military security, simply because the Arctic Council has been for policy shaping, not for policy making, meaning that it's council which does not really make decisions, and then there is a consensus principle. But it has been good in policy shaping. And now, if we take my challenges, then of course it means that security is redefined, meaning comprehensive security, including climate change, environmental degradation. And then, of course, the Arctic Council is working on those big issues. Actually, environmental protection is the main activity, the main pillar of the Arctic Council. So, and we have seen benefit in that cooperating, in that cooperation. But of course, now, it should become more policy making platform. Really implement the decisions. That's what we need now. No new institutions, but really to do it, to do the job and complete it. Thank you.
So even though it seems difficult, you want us to keep on pushing for integrating it into the Arctic Council. You're not afraid that, how about the things that Barbara touched upon about the risk of having a spillover from other conflicts? Don't you think if you include the security matter, you will more easily reach a deadlock where you are thinking about security in a bigger picture? Or what are your comments on that?
Well, it's very important point of view, absolutely, and there is no need to underestimate that. But these issues, like Christer mentioned, they should be discussed in other platforms, in other, in more global platforms, because the Arctic Council was not established for that, and so it was established for functional cooperation on environmental protection and sustainable development. So that's why, and it's not an international organization; it's a high-level forum, but for policy shaping. So that's why, to make a clear division of labor.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Then I will give the floor to Rasmus, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you to my colleagues for very good points. First of all, I agree completely with what Christer said about arms control, and I think, how to say, the tragedy of Arctic security is the tragedy of arms control diplomacy. But it's up to the nuclear powers, and especially the United States, Russia, and China, to fix arms control diplomacy. The question for the 5 Nordic countries and for Canada is, how do we get a seat at that table? Because we are not natural participants in arms control diplomacy. But Canada, the old distant early warning line, the Kingdom of Denmark, the Thule radar, Norway, for example, the Vardø radar, which is nominally Norwegian, how to say, we provide the real estate. So how can we be part of that? How can we sit at that table which we don't belong at? And I think the only way we can sit at that table is by having the intellectual understanding. We need to have a very, very deep analytical understanding of these both nuclear and space arms control questions that I alluded to. The other thing is about this spillover and this Arctic exceptionalism, which I think is a very, very misleading way to talk about the Arctic and the rest of the world. Because how to say that, and after the Ukraine crisis, there's been a very unfortunate view to that. It's like a dichotomy, that you have the Arctic and you have Ukraine, and you have peace in the Arctic and proxy war in Eastern Ukraine. But the thing is that, and I think it's very much, how to say, a Nordic small state perspective. But if you're a superpower, if you're a great power, you are engaged in so many issues at the same time, and you carefully escalate horizontally or de-escalate horizontally from one issue area to the other deliberately. So while the West and Russia has been fighting a proxy war in Eastern Ukraine, the West and Russia also collaborated very closely on the International Space Station, on nuclear non-proliferation, the Iran nuclear deal, and of course, Europe is a major energy customer of the Russian Federation. Think about Nord Stream 2. So, how to say, when we talk about spillover and exceptionalism, I mean, this is a question of whether people choose to escalate horizontally these conflicts to the Arctic or not. And for example, when the West chooses financially or technologically Russian Arctic offshore energy development, that's such an example of an horizontal escalation. But yeah, we could all talk long about this. I think, how to say, one major question is, I mean, the nuclear powers, they have to fix arms control. And then the Nordics and Canada, we have to think about how do we get a seat at that table.
Thank you, Rasmus. And I think I will forward that question to our next speaker who marked, I think it was Andreas. So please bring forward the comment you had yourself, and then try to answer the question of how can we make sure the Nordics have a saying in this matter. Thank you.
Very simple question. Yes, I mean, perhaps I could just start with responding to what Rasmus said about spillover, because I agree with him. I don't think the spillover term is most accurate, because it's not an automatic effect. I very much agree with Rasmus that it's something that the states choose to do. Perhaps not so much the Nordic states, but perhaps a bit the great powers or NATO in this matter. But because you did see after 2014, you saw an increase in tension when it came to Norway-Russia relations or NATO-Russia relations in the Arctic, but the Barents Sea part of the Arctic. Suddenly the rhetoric changed, the interpretation of certain actions also changed a bit in a negative way. It didn't spiral out of control, it didn't lead to outright conflict, but something changed in that whole bilateral dynamic. And I think it didn't happen as a consequence, natural consequence of Crimea. No, I think it happened because the states chose to do so. Although, you know, what the public perceives and how, you know, we suddenly start talking about Russia and vice versa, how, say, NATO or Norway is being discussed in Moscow, perhaps it's a different dimension of it altogether. But going back to your initial question, Jonas, on, say, security institutions, I agree with Lassie as well that I don't think the Arctic Council is fit for the task, and that's not the purpose of it either. I think we tend to exaggerate sometimes also the role of the Arctic Council. It's not there to fix everything in the Arctic. It was never meant to. And I think if you look at defense security issues, the defense minister of Norway or Russia probably doesn't care at all about the Arctic Council and has never even thought about the Arctic Council. And I think you have to separate a bit between these different things as well, what one institution is doing and you know, from the defense issues. But that doesn't mean that there's not a need to discuss and deliberate more on security defense matters in the Arctic, also from just not the wide definition of security, but a more stricter one. But then the question is how, and I think, as also Lassie said, this has been debated for a long time now. There's no right answer. There were a couple of forums that existed up until 2014. Then they stopped functioning, or they stopped including Russia. Others have talked about the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, but it's a practical cooperation tool. It doesn't really do much beyond that. More recently, some scholars, Arctic scholars, have talked about a code of conduct in the Arctic relating to exercises. Perhaps that's a way to go, because the exercises in certain parts of the Arctic are increasing in magnitude and frequency. And then you still have bilateral security dialogue between, perhaps most crucially and perhaps, but between Norway, bilateral security dialogue, which we're dependent on having. Does Canada need a bilateral security dialogue with Russia? Perhaps less so. So some of these things are developing just purely functionally. And then finally, going to your question about the role of the Nordics and how they can alleviate their own or rise to the task. I mean, Norway just joined the UN Security Council. We can debate whether that has any impact at all. Is that a tool or a venue to do so? I sometimes think we tend to cluster all the Nordic countries into one basket and see them as a unified group. And I really don't think that they are. I think Denmark has rather different security approaches than Norway does. And then you add Finland and Sweden, and then there's a whole different ballgame. So how can these countries do more together? I'm no expert on Nordic cooperation. I know both Lassie and Rasmus in particular have done a lot on this, but perhaps there is more scope for it. I would love to see Nordic cooperation expand, whether it's through Nordefco or just in general through the Nordic Council. But I mean, others can answer how likely that is. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. And then I will just say to everyone participating online that please forward your questions in the chat, and then I will try to cover as many as possible. We have approximately 15 minutes left, and then I will give the floor to Barbara, who would like to ask the same questions about the institutions, whether we have the right institutions to deal with the matter of security right now. And then also a question from Lena, who shared it in the chat, about the EU Arctic policy, which is now being updated. And maybe you could bring forward your perspectives on what should be included, should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonas. Well, it's always not an easy to be the last speaker answering the question. However, I'll try to bring another perspective coming back from already our mentioned analysis on Arctic states' policies and strategies. And what we really found out was how, and it's also following up on what already Rasmus and Andreas mentioned, that how security is perceived in each of the Arctic states. So it is, when you look at those strategies and policies, it is an indicator or dimension, as really it is fragmented, right? We cannot see the same approach of Russia and the United States and Canada and Norway and others. Simply, it is not there, and obviously this is something that we need to take into consideration as well. And when we look at the security dimension or security indicator really in details, it was interesting to see that only 3 countries actually highlighted or even mentioned security to a certain extent. And most of those Arctic states, it was Canada, United States, and really surprisingly Iceland, which even doesn't have the armed forces, that talk about and put the emphasis on security the most in their Arctic strategies and documents. When we talk about the potential spillover or conflicts mingling into the Arctic states or Arctic issues, when we analyze the security indicator, we also look at how NATO is perceived in Arctic states and observer countries. And again, really surprisingly, only 4 countries mention it. And again, it was Iceland, Denmark, and then Norway that actually talk about NATO and potential of involvement of NATO in the Arctic. And for us, it was also important to look at the Arctic Council chairmanship programs and declarations. And again, to our surprise, we didn't really find a problem or perceiving security as a threat or a problem, even after 2014, after Crimea. So none of the Arctic states actually in their strategies or policies towards the Arctic mentioned Russia as a threat. It was only mentioned by Norway indirectly. However, it wasn't really specifically stated that, for example, Russian expansive foreign policy might be a threat to the Arctic security. So all of the Arctic states repeatedly emphasize in their strategies that it is important to keep the Arctic as a region of security and peaceful relations. So this is also important to look at really what we might perceive in news headlines and from the broader audience. While if you look at those really strategic documents that were adopted by the governments and should represent the state of the foreign affairs or domestic affairs of the given countries, it is not really perceived as a threat. So not really talking about security in military perspective. We've seen some food security and maritime security and other security related issues, but not really security in this hard military perspective.
Well, thank you. And I just again want to remind everyone participating that you can send questions in the chat. Until you do that, I will ask the questions because I believe there's so much to cover still. And to follow up on the last two comments from Barbara and Andreas, I would like to ask the speakers whether anyone would comment on the importance of NORDEFCO and NATO in oh, let me see, there's a question. Yeah, that is the question about the EU Arctic policy. I believe we have already covered. And but in particular in NORDEFCO and NATO, are there anyone who think that these two institutions should be more important and play a bigger role in dealing with Arctic security matters? And Rasmus, you can please start. Thank you.
Well, just a very quick comment, because I think it's also important to see that, how to say, the comprehensive security that Lassi mentions is not, it's not in opposition to it to the, how to say, strategic stability, nuclear weapons questions that we also talk about. Because, for example, I mean, the extreme militarization and nuclearization of the Arctic, especially around the Kola Peninsula, that's a huge threat to human security. I mean, if you have accidents with all this nuclear material, and there, of course, the Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and the northern parts of these countries, I mean, they have huge shared interest in the comprehensive security around this militarization and nuclearization of this area. I'm just thinking about here in Tromsø, we have a very big part of the Norwegian Radiation Safety Authority, and I'm convinced that in Sweden and Finland that you also have very important radiation safety authorities in the northern parts. So I think, how to say, I think the Nordic countries can very well sit together and talk about understanding comprehensively why is this part of the world, especially the Barents region, why is it so important to Russia and to the United States? Why is it so militarized? Why is it so nuclearized? So we can understand that and perhaps have a seat at that table, and also comprehensively understand what, for example, environmental risks that poses. Because with some of these new hypersonic weapon developments the Russians are engaged in, there has been radiation accidents.
May I continue?
Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So to echo that, I mean, actually, nuclear safety in 1980s, early 1990s, was the trigger for Arctic Environmental Protection Cooperation. It was partly because of Chernobyl nuclear accident, but also very much because of the nuclear submarine accidents in the Barents Sea and the Norwegian Sea. So that put the governments to act. But first you had NGOs, like the Sami Council, who became very concerned on the state of the Arctic environment because of nuclear accidents. So it's very much there, and there is a connection, and it has been discussed. Actually, the first cooperation between Russia and two NATO nuclear safety, Arctic military cooperation between Russia, Norway, and the USA was established 2 weeks after the Arctic Council was established. So we have that. And now the question is exactly how to take it further, how to implement that, how to connect, how to put the decision makers to that you have to implement the comprehensive security, because now we have not only nuclear safety, pollution, we have climate change. Thank you.
And Lassi, just to follow up, we got a question here from one in the audience saying, with the climate change, climate warming and the ice melting, more interest will be directed towards the Northeast Passage as a trade route from Asia to Europe. What do the security concerns of this look like from your perspective?
If we talk about the Northeast Passage, where you have mostly the northern sea route by Russia, I mean, not so big impact because there is already traffic, and it is very much because of the Yamal LNG, and there are special vessels there to bring the liquid gas to East Asia, Japan, South Korea, China. So I don't see. Of course, it can increase the sailing months by 1 or 2 if there will be less sea ice. But then in wintertime, that it's not the ice per se, it's the flush. Really breakers. But if we talk about Northwest Passage, yes, there if so.
And then I will give all of you a quick chance to answer one final question, because we are running out of. We're setting up a scenario. Minister for a self-chosen Nordic country. What would your first action be on the Arctic security matter tomorrow? You can have anything popping into your mind. Okay? Is there anything you know you would the political?
Thank you. I would be brave enough to propose that we will start to implement all the decisions what we have made, and then make new decisions, like, for example, to freeze offshore oil drilling in Arctic waters.
All right, thank you. And then a quick comment from Rasmus, perhaps. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, first of all, I would say we in the West, we have to learn the art to keep talking to people we're in conflict with. We have this childish habit that when we're in conflict with somebody, we don't want to talk to them. And we have, I mean, it's us who have sabotaged these Arctic security fora because we don't want to talk to Russia. And I mean, Russia is not going to leave Ukraine or East Ukraine or Crimea because of that. So we set ourselves up to failure. So we got to learn to talk to people we are in conflict with. And there I would say that the Norwegian Labour Party has proposed a Center for Arctic Security, Strategic Studies in Northern Norway, which I think could be such an academic platform for all sides to speak together at the academic level.
All right. If we go on to your Christer, do you have any suggestion for what to do as a foreign minister of a Nordic country?
Nordic country, yeah. I think I would emphasize the importance to come back control track. So we have largely avoided the main issue here, that this area is important for Russia and the United States, and soon to China, because there are nuclear weaponized submarines which can have the second strike capability. And that capability means, for example, that the Americans can come with the submarines close to Murmansk, and it's only 15 minutes to fly with the missile to Moscow. So it's very big, very real threat, and the Russians can do the same. So if things go worse, so these catastrophe movies that we have seen about almost sending missiles away can become by accident.
All right, and then we will have a brief comment from Barbara.
Sure, thank you. Well, I would say we don't need really new institutions. Therefore, I would rather encourage all the Arctic states to keep or support and even pump more money to the science and support the science cooperation, because as we know, through the science and through those patterns of cooperation, it can really positively spill over to other areas of cooperation and perhaps maybe overcome some of those conflicting areas. So these of course includes also how we can combat or even try to slow down the climate change and the challenges posed by climate change. So one thing, just add more money to science cooperation.
Thank you. And then the final comment being from Andreas, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I like Lasse's idea about freezing oil and gas development. I mean, predominantly in the Arctic, that would be great. But my point is more along Rasmus's point as well, how to talk to each other. I really think from a Norwegian point of view, if I suddenly became a Norwegian minister, we need to talk to Russia. So I very much agree with setting up, maybe not an official dialogue because that might be too difficult, but at least informal security dialogue with Russia. And also to dare to talk with China about the Arctic officially, and also probably state that China is actually not a threat to the Arctic and counter a bit of the US rhetoric that we see from the White House.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you. I believe we covered a lot within an hour and none of us had to travel together. So in some way we can see that it can actually work with digging into this digital space of debating. So thank you so much for giving it a try. Now we'll give the floor to Joni, who will close the event.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, honored panelists. Thank you, Jonas, for moderating. It was an excellent start for this year's NCIA 2020, or this year's NCIA. And I invite you to the coming panel. So this afternoon, only in half an hour, 1.5 hours, we have a debate on a panel on the future of the EU from the Nordic perspective. Tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Central European time, the keynote. And on in the afternoon, debate on a panel on Nordic Baltic youth in climate politics. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you panelists, and wish everyone a sunny start for the afternoon. And Rasmus, you have still something to say, or?
Thank you.
Okay, that's all. Okay, thank you everyone. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.